My name is Sergey, and I'm a truck driver. As boring as it may sound, I've been driving on the roads for over 10 years. Every day I transported cargo without giving a second thought to what might be hidden inside. But what happened that day changed my life forever. I received a task that seemed no different from the others: to transport a few containers from Ukraine to Russia. However, this time everything was different. These containers weren't just empty. They contained something that could destroy entire armies. And without the slightest idea, I became part of the greatest secret ever hidden on these roads. If only I had known that what I was carrying could change the course of history. At night when I set off on my trip, I didn't think that my cargo was not just a few boxes, but an explosive combination that would lead to shocking consequences. This wasn't just a truck. It was a machine that could destroy an entire army. This was only part of a much larger game. I didn't know what the plan was, but something inside me was uneasy. Maybe it was a secret I wasn't meant to know. I couldn't even imagine that my innocent truck would turn into a cog in a massive machine that would make Russian generals watch in despair as their air bases were obliterated. Imagine this. Everything felt so ordinary. I was once again behind the wheel, listening to the radio and thinking about my business. The road stretched endlessly, and I felt calm. Until I drove further north, when doubts started to creep in. However, the doubts stayed at the level of small details. I was driving the truck, and there was neither time nor desire to think about what I was transporting. My task was simple: deliver it. And that's what I did. No questions, no idea what awaited me ahead. When I finally arrived at the location, I felt a strange tension in the air, as if something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what exactly. The road was difficult. I hardly saw any other vehicles, just dust and fog rising from beneath the wheels. The surroundings felt unfriendly. This wasn't what I was used to. Instead of the usual storage areas and a few concrete pavilions I normally dealt with, I saw only wasteland. Far away, there were no residential buildings or large warehouses. Just old, half-destroyed structures, covered in dust, that seemed like mute witnesses to a great war that had taken place here, beyond my understanding. There was a pulsating silence, and I couldn't help but feel how the calm around me added even more anxiety. The whole atmosphere seemed different, and I felt that this wasn't an ordinary shipment. This was something bigger than just work. But even without knowing what was going on, I continued moving forward because the task was clear. Arrive, park the truck, leave the container, and wait until everything was ready. I parked the truck, and the feeling of anxiety started to grow. Around me were several men who seemed to be part of the local team, and again, nothing unusual. Just a standard meeting where I deliver the cargo and leave everything behind. This was all I expected. No problems, and a smooth return, just as calm as my arrival. They told me that everything would be ready in a few hours. I left the container, and honestly, I almost immediately forgot about it. It was just one of the thousands of my shipments, and I never thought it would become part of such an important mission. But a few hours later, when I returned to the truck, I was given the news that I had been part of something completely unexpected and revolutionary. Those containers I left were more than just boxes of equipment. They contained FPV drones, technology I couldn't even imagine when I delivered them. The same drones that were meant to destroy a large portion of the Russian Air Force. The first ones launched like a real swarm, and in the place where just hours ago there were silent containers, an operation had already begun that tore the sky over Russian bases apart. I heard the first explosions. At first, I couldn't believe it was real. Then I saw how the massive Russian strategic aircraft, intended for attacks on Ukraine, were literally exploding on the runways. Their hulls scattered across the airfield. It looked like scenes from a movie, but it was reality. I couldn't even imagine how something so small and cheap could destroy such huge and expensive planes. They were torn apart in the air. I watched as they fell, one by one, with no chance of survival. But the worst part wasn't even how those planes exploded. It was that the entire process happened without any active human involvement. without a single shot fired from our side. The technology that I hadn't even understood at that moment became the instrument to carry out a mission that many military strategists wouldn't have dared attempt at the beginning. It was such a precise strike that within minutes, the Russians lost their ability to conduct strategic attacks, not even knowing how they became the victims. When I found out what had happened after the launch, I couldn't believe my eyes. At first, it was just reports I heard from the other end of the line. But when I saw it with my own eyes, all my doubts vanished. Russia had lost dozens of its strategic aircraft, and each one cost millions of dollars. It was a true catastrophe for their air fleet, and I didn't even realize how serious it was. Bombers like the Tu-95, Tu-22, and a few others, which were always considered immovable in their power, were destroyed in mere minutes, and the worst part for them, their air bases literally turned to ash. How could I have even imagined this could happen? I wasn't prepared for this, but what happened after the drones launched exceeded all my expectations. It seems that this day still lives inside me. I still see how this mass drone launch became the final blow to Russia's air power. What happened was unimaginable. The drones I delivered performed their task just like in the best-case scenario, without a single shot from the Ukrainian side, with no risk to our military. This entire operation was carried out with such incredible precision that as an ordinary truck driver, I couldn't believe I was part of it. I never imagined that my simple task could have such an effect. The small, cheap drones that emerged from the containers I delivered were able to destroy aircraft capable of carrying nuclear warheads, becoming the main weapon that shifted the balance of power in this conflict. These were not just toys or prototypes. This was the weapon of the future. How is that even possible? How could these small, inexpensive drones, which didn't even require pilots, destroy such powerful and valuable aircraft, usually stored in underground bunkers and considered strategic elements of any army? And it all happened without a single shot from our side. I sat there thinking I couldn't believe my eyes. I realized that these containers I had delivered became part of something much bigger. This wasn't just a cargo delivery. It was an entire, well-prepared mechanism designed to change the course of the war. I was just a small part of this enormous machine, which pushed countries into a new level of warfare. There was no blood, no cruelty from our side. This was an incredible operation based on bypass and precision. We didn't waste thousands of people, we didn't send pilots on dangerous missions. It all became possible thanks to those very small drones that calmly flew in, completed their mission, and disappeared. But what struck me the most was that I didn't realize how significant this task was. All this time, I had no idea that these containers I delivered became part of one of the largest covert operations in modern warfare. I was just a small part of this mechanism that changed the course of this war, and now it had become part of history. I thought about how many such quiet moments exist in this world when simply performing a simple task can change so much. What I did is now part of a great story. This was an operation recognized even in the world of intelligence agencies. But at the same time, I, a truck driver, was just a regular participant in what seemed impossible. I remained just a driver, but I understood that my role in all this was significant, and no one could have imagined how this cargo changed the lives of many people. I saw how the drones completed their mission, without any active human participation, without direct combat. And all of this became part of the strategy that decided the future's fate. And even though I didn't see everything that happened after the launch, I knew that my containers, the same ones I left on the field, had become part of Ukraine's greatest victory. A few days after the operation ended, I still couldn't come to terms with what had happened. My role in all of this was becoming more of a reality for me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that now I had become part of something that changed the course of history. At first, everything seemed ordinary. I was just doing my job, with no idea how important my involvement was. But then the messages started coming. At first, they were just rumors, huge losses for Russia. Then came the official news, videos, photos. The Russian Air Force was practically destroyed. The planes I had seen in photos before the war now lay in pieces on airfield runways, scattered across the sky. And I started to realize my containers, my ordinary cargo delivered to that place, had become decisive in this conflict. All this time, I didn't know that after completing the mission, such consequences would follow. What I delivered turned out to be more than just drones. It was a revolution in aerospace technology that changed everything. My truck became a carrier of weapons capable of changing the course of war. But how I learned that all this had serious consequences for me personally, I didn't know and never suspected. Calls started coming, not from familiar voices, but from people I didn't know. Phone numbers I'd never seen before. From the first call, I realized something was wrong. This wasn't a normal call from a company or any routine matter. It was an attempt to find out what I knew, whether I could provide more information about that mission. A few days after the operation ended, I felt how my life had changed. Every step I took was under careful observation. What I was doing, where I was going, whether I noticed anything unusual on the way. The sense of calm I once had was gone. And even though no one was openly following me, I felt I no longer had any privacy. What was most terrifying was learning that only the highest powers could have taken control of this operation. I had become part of something much bigger than I could have imagined. And though I was just one of the people who delivered the cargo, my name had become part of a global conspiracy. Since then, I couldn't stay in one place. The feeling that I was being watched, that I was part of something bigger, became unbearable. I had to change cities, flee from old acquaintances, because I could no longer be sure who my friends were and who were my enemies. Everything I knew before I became a truck driver was now in question. And even after so much time had passed, I couldn't shake the shadow that followed me. I couldn't return to my normal life. What happened to those planes I saw in the photos, thousands of burned strategic bombers, was more than enough for a whole country to remember me. And I began to feel that even if I forgot for just 1 second what I had done, someone would undoubtedly remind me of it. And then, after everything I had been through, I finally decided to find peace. I moved to a new place, lost contact with old friends, and tried to start a new life. But all of this was just an outward illusion of peace. The shadow of the past never left me. I was often haunted not only by suspicious calls but also by the constant feeling that I was being watched. I lived in constant anxiety, as if every step I took was being tracked and I couldn't ignore it. One evening, everything changed. I was sitting at home reflecting on my life when a call shattered the silence again. This time it was a number I definitely wasn't expecting. I answered, and on the other end, I heard a voice that seemed strangely familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had heard it before. "Did you think we forgot about you?" said the voice, and immediately a chill ran through me. "Everything you did wasn't a coincidence, Sergey. You were just a tool in a much bigger plan, and we know you know more than you realized." My heart began to race in my chest, and I was stunned by what I had heard. Someone else knew who I was and what I had done? But how could they? I hadn't made any statements, hadn't left any traces. Didn't this story end when I left that container at the base? "Do you think we didn't intervene when all this started?" the voice continued. "Because we were counting on you, Sergey. You were loyal, but you still don't realize how far you've gone." Those words made me feel desperately cold. I could feel my nerves tightening, and my mind couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. But this wasn't the end. The worst was just beginning. "You've forgotten one detail," said the voice, and paused. "You only brought the first container. You didn't know, but the others, they have a completely different purpose. And we'll do everything to make you understand what's really happening." At that moment, I understood everything. It was all part of a bigger game where I wasn't just a pawn. I was part of a plan with much deeper roots than I could have imagined. I wasn't just a participant in the operation anymore. I was the one who delivered something much more dangerous than I could have known. And now, I was in their hands. The voice on the line concluded, "Did you think it was over? No, Sergey. You're just beginning to understand how you were used, and why your life will never be the same again." I heard the sound of a button clicking on the other end of the line, and the voice suddenly vanished. I was left alone, but the feeling that I was being guided, manipulated, and still being watched became all too real. I had become part of an even bigger game, used as a puppet, without even realizing that I was just one of many. Now I understood that everything I had experienced was no accident. I wasn't just a truck driver. I had become part of a network that operates in the shadows. And now all I could do was watch, as everything I had done spiraled into even greater consequences. And this time, it seemed there was no way out of the game.